You want to talk about Christmas? For our last presentation of the year, it will be Mike Anderson, and he's going to do a presentation about the early entertainment that was occurring in Cochise County. Opera, vaudeville, and some other stuff. There's a lot of stuff going on, so that's going to be our November presentation. For December, is what I'd like to do this year is, for the holidays, do something different. We'll have dinner as normal at the Longhorn. We'll have the officers meeting as normal. And then at 7 o'clock, we'll have a musical presentation by a professional musician for about a half hour or so. We'll have a break. And then for the next hour is what I'd like to do is have do poems or short stories. We have a resident poet, and several of you have stories and poems. And so I thought it'd be kind of fun to share those for the last hour of the meeting in December. And then we'll have a raffle for a Christmas basket that will be put together by Karen. If you saw her basket at the gather, she does wonderful baskets. And I mean, they're huge. So that's, I will follow this up with an email to the membership. I need to finalize a couple details, but we wanted to try something different this year. And of course, we'll ask the members to bring snacks and drinks to share, probably non-alcoholic. That's up to you. We won't inquire, but that'll be for the break. So I just want to try something a little bit different. Everybody seems to like the poems and the storytelling when we do that, so I thought maybe let's do an hour of it. If you would like to do that, please get a hold of me after I send out the email so I can make a list and be sure and get anyone up that wants to do a poem or a story. And of course, we're talking Western historical story. Poems can be written by you, or they can be written by someone else, and you can simply read them. So that's kind of what I proposed to the officers, and we agreed, let's give it a try, something a little bit different this year. And I think that's all I have.
Well, I'll tell you, you guys missed a really good trip. I've been doing this job for 4 years, I think now, and I think this was the best trip yet so far. Going out to Deming, to Cook's Canyon, and Hachita. Our first day we went to Hachita was two ghost towns, Old Hachita and New Hachita. So it was old mining town. That's Geronimo's surrender point. Who's that guy in the yellow? What a good-looking guy. What do you think? We didn't get Debbie going into the bushes, though. Oh. Next. This is old Hachita. Definitely some cool buildings out there. Still, you could go see the holes in the mines. Still a bunch of mining equipment left out there. We won't tell you about the secret pile of gold that we found. That's probably New Hachita. Really cool church there. Yeah, there's the church. That's the rest stop. Can you believe that's the rest stop in Hachita? Who is that good looking? We were going to go to the museum in, where was that in? Columbus, but it was closed, but we could still walk around. Cool tanks in an old cannon. That was like one of the first ones, bolt action kind of a cannon, so it was definitely pretty cool. It's so remote there that they got the weirdest hours of being open. Must have missed that one. I wouldn't have been able to go in there. Dang, where was that? Oh, that was the restaurant you guys ate at. So those guys ate at a restaurant that thought the whole one big room was all full of stuffed animals.
This sign, you turn off. It's the only place
On Saturday, we went to Fort Cummings. Definitely a little tricky four-wheel drive road. The fort was definitely pretty cool. I mean, it's been there for 100 years. People go in there scavenging, and there was still hundreds of square-cut nails. The first time I seen a square-cut upholstery nail. So could you imagine making nails this big by hand with a square head on it? I found a piece of porcelain china, 1886 on it. So it was really cool to walk around there. I couldn't believe how much stuff. There was a spring there still that's been used for hundreds of years. The wagon train road was right there. We got to see, is that the grave?
That is the
Oh, the stage station? That's the snake that Doug stepped on and sent chills up and down everybody's spine. So Fort Cummings. And the entrance to that, if you could look at it, it looks more like a castle. So there's not a whole lot of walls left, but the entrance to there was one of the main big walls that were still left. And then you could see just foundations for most of it. That was just the entrance to going into the fort. But really surprising the amount of stuff that was still laid on the ground. They must have had a fire in the fort too, because you could actually see fused glass pieces that were all over the place. Going into the Narrows there, that was definitely a pretty tricky, bumpy road and everything. Almost got stuck in the mud. There was a little mud wallow there. Thought we were going to have to get out. Deb likes that. She wants us to do that road again next year. One of the things that was there was the Freeman Thomas massacre site that we got to see. If you could notice, like to the right, all the rocks are only about this big. So these guys came from the fort, tried to fake out the Indians, let their horse and carriage go on ahead, and they jumped off, but the carriage flipped over only about a mile away, so the Indians knew they weren't there and came back. These guys, and we could see it, that little rock fort that was put up, they hastily put that up there, lasted 3 days against the Indians. Said that these guys, was a Cochise, said that those guys were the bravest men that he's ever seen, being able to put up 3 days worth of a fight like that. And you could see there was nothing. This was the Membranes pictograph site. This was probably one of the best sites that I've ever seen. Probably over 200 pictographs. I think they were smoking a little peyote or something out there because there was some weird stuff. That first one was like looking, oh, this was one of the best ones. The goat, and then there was a rattlesnake one. But there was also like that first, there's a rattlesnake. And they were huge too, real big. But there was definitely some crazy ones, look like sperm guys with candy canes sticking out of their heads. So you know that guy was eating a little bit something weird out there. There was water tanks in the rocks. It probably hadn't rained out there in a while, and there was still water in tanks there. I had my little dog with me, and there was a couple up there with like 3 other dogs. That was like their swimming pool. By the time they got up to the top, they were all jumped into that swimming pool. Oh, that's the last one. Okay, so you guys definitely missed out on a good trip. The thing about the officers and stuff too, if you don't want to do all of it, like I would like to give up Trail Boss too, because I've been kind of doing it for 4 years and busy doing other stuff, but I wouldn't mind sharing the duties. I'm not really a good computer guy. So, I mean, even if you just wanted to help make a flyer for me and get the info to Doug, I would still come up here and do the talk and still go on the trips and all that. And the same thing with Doug. If you don't want to be the whole sheriff, if you could just do 1 or 2 parts, he does like 5 things. So anything you could do to help him along. We got a pretty good club here, but it takes people to kind of step up and do this. And you don't know if you could do it until you try. I never thought 20 years ago I'd be standing up here talking to people and taking them on trips. So, my job is one of the easiest one. You get to pick a place and take 50 of your closest friends with you. So anything you could do to help us out, we would really like it. Thanks.
Roundup foreman's already spoken. Good shape there. Madam to labor for
the October to Rest is basically on the whole Tombstone movie and Tombstone. But I found an article about John Clum, and John Clum was the mayor of Tombstone and founder editor of the Epitaph. In fact, he's from the Dutch Reformed Church, and where Doug and I met in the Dutch Reformed Church in Tempe, Arizona. So he's basically from our home church. Found out that he actually went to Alaska, and he started over 11 new post offices in the gold rush towns in Alaska. And in Nome, he met up again with Wyatt Earp, who was the part owner of the Dexter Saloon. And then, anyway, so he's a very famous guy. I think he also was, wasn't he the Indian agent, Doug, for San Carlos?
Sent there by the Dutch Reformed.
Yeah, by the Dutch Reformed Church. Okay, the newest roundup that comes from Western Writers of America has several great articles. It has a wonderful review of Doug's train robbery book. That's why I had to bring it up. Do you want me to do the Corral rep too?
Actually, we were supposed to do to Wonderford, and we just did.
Okay, whatever. Pharaoh Zierler. Okay, this is October. Okay. October 6th and 7th, this weekend, historical tours in Mescal, also Rex Allen Days in Wilcox. This weekend also is Art in the Park. And next weekend is October 14th and 15th is the Patagonia Fall Festival. October 14th is the Bisbee Stained Glass Tour in Bisbee. October 20th to the 22nd is El Dorado Tombstone. Now we're going to ask Jean to come up. She's going to talk to us about the Tombstone Territorial Rendezvous.
Okay, our annual Tombstone Territory Rendezvous is going to be October 25th to 29th here in Shefflin Hall of October. Our theme this year is Terror in Tombstone, Gunfights and Fighters on the High Desert. Our flyer. I have registration sheets. We have a program of many presenters, including Doug and several others that are coming in from other states. Doug is going to do exploits of the High Five Gang. One of my people I work with on research, Peter Brand from Australia, is coming in. And he's going to do The Killing of Charlie Storms by Luke Short. My husband Chuck is going to do a couple of different things on gunfighters and gunfights. Gil Storms, you know Gil, a lot of you, is going to do Did Wyatt Kill Curly Bill? We have Mark Warren coming from Florida, and he does really well for example, he's going to do What Made Wyatt Earp Tick. Our registration and luncheon is here, and we're also going to have a book signing on Saturday afternoon with several different authors in the foyer here. We're doing a gunfight walk and tour on Friday morning. There will be a booklet that goes with that. There's probably 25 different gunfights we're going to do, and it'll just be mostly on Allen Street. We're going to do the Spicer hearing trial, and that's where we use people from the audience to help us out. That's always a lot of fun. We have 4 meals, which I will mention. Thanks. Yeah. We're having a luncheon with the registration. We're having a luncheon after the gunfight at the Four Deuces. And then Saturday night, we're having dinner at the Tombstone Ranch. And then Saturday noon, we will have dinner, lunch, compliments of the Hunleys at the Birdcage. So I have, some of you have already signed up. Those that haven't, I've got the registration forms with me. The total cost is $100 per person or $175 per couple.
To finish off, we have November 4th and 5th is the Empire Ranch Cowboy Festival. November 11th and 12th, Native Treasure shows in Tucson. So, Cowboy Christmas in Mescal, the day after Thanksgiving for 2 days. Doug is usually selling books, and so is Deborah Lawson back there. And there's another bookseller and many vendors. December 3rd, Cochise County Historical Society Annual Banquet. And again, Empire Ranch, December 9th, Christmas at the ranch. That's it.
I was at the Gather this year, and there was a group from Los Angeles Corral of the Westerners, and they had a gentleman who had written some poetry books about Boot Hills in the West, various ones. Some of them were from our Boot Hill, but not all of them, and one I wasn't able to verify which ones were from our Boot Hill, so I just picked one, and what he did, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. What he did was pick a person buried there and write a poem about their life. So this is just an example of what they've got. This is about Daniel Walker, Doc Drunkard is what the title of it is. Daniel Walker, Doc Drunkard. Sheriff Burnett often took me aside. He told me to stop drinking, and I really tried. He always seemed a mystery to me how alcohol mixed with medicine happened to be. The curse of so many doctors who treated the ill became addicted to the product of the distillery still. The Civil War caused the impossible situation. To save a life would require amputation. I had to saw off many a leg and an arm. You just can't do that without mental harm. And like so many others, I took to drink to blot out the memories and not have to think about grape shot and buckshots and what they could do in marking me physically and mentally too. After the war, I came out to the West seeking a place where I could find some rest. I rented a store and hung up a shingle. A bell at the door would go off with a tingle. The doctor is welcome to take care of ills, to prescribe medications and liquids and pills. If the boy broke his arm while climbing a tree and his parents were poor, I set out it for free. Word soon spread of my skill as a physician, elevating my status in town to a lofty position. A number of women I helped to give birth, charged them for free, a fee for what it was worth. Then came a day I could not deliver. While drunk, I lost my patient forever. The number of patients went into decline. The whole town knew my practice was no longer fine. They called me Doc Drunkard, a fitting description, and on my tombstone they put a damning inscription, denouncing me as a drunk and a fool who never should have attended medical school. I know that now, being dead in my grave, paying a price for the life I failed to save.
The only thing is, there are no gentlemen in play for.
Yeah.
I can't recommend the TTR enough. I've been to the last 3, I think. And I mean, just the food, I go just for the food. I don't care about these cowboy guys telling stories and stuff. I mean, just the food is outrageous and stuff. This one, I was talking to Karen last month about my place. I got 4 acres over in Whetstone. I call it the Walking Buzzard Ranch. I lived in 2 sheds that I built for 3 years using a porta potty until I could save enough money to build the house. So this one's called the Walking Buzzard Ranch. I brought 4 beautiful acres in the Southwest. I left San Diego and gave it my best. It was a tough time at night, all alone out there, but at least I could go to Buddy's bar and get a cold beer. Being retired at 55 is the way it should be. Living life while you can is surely the key. Having bunnies and piggies come to your door, what more in the world could you ever ask for? It took a lot of sweat to build a new home, screaming and cursing, working your fingers to the bone. But in the end, I'm sure you'll agree, it's nice to have a place indoors to pee. I call my place the Walking Buzzard Ranch. No, I didn't call it that by chance. It could be that I could stretch a lie, or that we were just too full of crap to fly.
It's my great pleasure tonight to introduce George Whitehead. George is a lecturer, a longtime resident of Benson. He's also been a volunteer at the Amaranth, which leads us to tonight's presentation on the Fulton's FF Ranch, which is now the Amaranth. Has anybody never been to the Amaranth? You got to get, it's beautiful grounds. The museum is, it's literally a hidden gem. Native American artifacts. And if you haven't seen their Zuni jewelry display, it's very, very worthwhile place to go. So George is promised he's going to tell us all the secrets of the Fultons. George?
Okay, thank you, Gary. Thank you, Doug, and thank you for all you do for the Tombstone Corral. If you were expecting a history lecture tonight, you're going to be disappointed because it's not his story, it's her story. This is the story of Rose Hayden Fulton. It's hard to read here, but it says Rose of the Double F. This is a watercolor that came out of Rose's guest book that was left there by artist Hamilton King. Enoch Steen received orders from the War Department to establish a military presence in Arizona. He left Fort Craig, Colorado with 200 men of the 1st Dragoons, and after 4 hard days on the road, he stopped here to rest. So it became known as Dragoon Rest, or simply Dragoon. 30 years later, Lloyd Adams from Coleman County, Texas, bought some waterfront property in Arizona, in Gila Bend, Arizona. When he saw what he had bought, he was headed home to Texas. He stopped to camp here. The Indians ran off with his livestock, so there he was. He did what he had to do. He put down roots and stayed. He was joined by his 3 brothers and other extended family members, and eventually the area around Dragoon became known as Texas Canyon, because that's where all them darn people that talk funny lived. So that's our setting for our drama tonight. Now to introduce the leading lady, Rose Hayden Fulton. Was born the 16th of July, 1881 in Waterbury, Connecticut. We talk about rich people being born with a silver spoon in their mouth. In Rose's case, it was a brass spoon. Her family owned and controlled 2/3 of the copper and brass industry in the United States. She grew up a very privileged child. She went to private girls' schools. She spent her summers at the family estate on Fisher's Island off the coast of New York, or cruising up and down the eastern seaboard in the family yacht. 1903, she married the second son of another affluent family. His name was William Shirley Fulton. Her family was old money. His was new money. If you look at the city directory for Waterbury, Connecticut in the year 1905, you will find Rose and her husband, William Shirley, living at home with 2 Irish servant girls, and his job is listed as apprentice machinist. 4 years later, when they put out a new city directory, they are living at home with 2 Irish servant girls. Now they have 2 children, and his occupation is listed as president of the company. So, if you are taking notes tonight, be sure you write that down. If you want to go from apprentice machinist to president of the company in 4 years, always marry the boss's daughter. Well, I guess I got to put that on, right? Yep. I say, living up to tradition here. Okay. All right. 1924, Rose and her husband's son was old enough for high school, so they enrolled him in the prestigious Evans Ranch School for Boys in Tucson. At the time, it was listed as being 10 miles outside Tucson. Today, of course, it's swamped by housing developments. When they came out here, enrolled him in school, I noticed the year they enrolled him, the class is listed as having a Fulton, a Roosevelt, a Vanderbilt, and a DuPont. When they came to visit him for Christmas break, they stayed at the second oldest guest ranch in southern Arizona, the Triangle T in Dragoon. They decided that they loved that area, it would be a good place to retire. So in 1930, when their son graduated from high school, he retired as president of the company, and they bought a 400-acre homestead from Oscar Coffey. Oscar lived in this house here with his wife and daughter and had an apple orchard. Fulton paid $8,000 for the 400 acres and then paid $800 to Mr. Coffey to remodel the house so he would have something to live in until he could build suitable quarters. A little about the history of the house. It was built by George Mulkey in 1895. George Mulkey was shot to death on the front porch by James Neal, who just rode up and opened fire on him in a dispute over a mining claim. Today, the house looks pretty much like that. It housed the Ameren staff for years. It was known as the old homestead of the foreman's house. It hasn't been occupied for about 10 years, and it is slowly beginning to return back to the earth. Dragoon at the time was described by one author as being a railroad section house and a curious assortment of dogs. Okay, so in 1932, Mr. Fulton hired noted Tucson architect Merritt Starkweather to design him a Spanish colonial style hacienda for their dwelling place here. We tend to think that we live in the American Southwest, but we forget that 200 years before George Washington was born, this was northern New Spain. And in the 1930s, Tucson was trying to capitalize on the tourist industry and was trying to market itself as the old Pueblo. So they were restoring Spanish colonial architecture. And if you go around Tucson, you can still find some public buildings that are in the colonial Spanish style. There's the Veterans Hospital, the old courthouse. If you've ever been to the Arizona Inn, then you've been, in essence, in the Fulton's dining room because it looks just the same. Today, if you were going to build that, you'd probably dynamite the hill and bulldoze it level and build a house on it. But Merritt Starkweather went to great lengths to preserve the landscape the way it was and structure the house around the rocks. So what you see here is looking north at the house from the old orchard. And this string of building right here with the arches, that's actually a walkway that leads from the main house down to the kitchen and the dining area. One thing that distinguishes Spanish colonial architecture is a lot of wrought iron. Archways, wrought iron, tile roofs. And here is this magnificent old gate that they had fabricated. You couldn't afford to have anything like that built today. That's all hand-wrought solid steel. That's not box iron. In the middle, you see the double F. Before there was the Amarin Foundation, there was the Fulton Foundation. And the double F was his trademark. So when they established the house, they registered that double F brand with the state of Arizona for cows and horses. It's difficult to find that old gate today. It's covered by shrubbery. And in that year, he registered the brand. He also, according to the financial records, bought 2 horses and 5 sets of tack for $25, which probably indicates that there was at least 3 horses that probably came with the ranch. Here's a view looking to the south. It shows their patio. This is the living room and the living room fireplace. Down each side of the patio, behind these arches, are bedrooms. I think there are 7 or 9 in total, I forget, because that is where the Fultons did their entertaining. And if you look at their guest book of people they entertained, you will find John D. Rockefeller thanked Mrs. Fulton for the nice lunch that she served him. We'll also find where George Gustav Hay signed in. He was a wealthy industrialist that established the Museum of the American Indian in New York. You will also find listed in there Frank Hibben, independently wealthy big game hunter and amateur archaeologist. Apparently, because of his exaggerated stories about big game hunts and lost civilization, he was also known as Fibbin Hibben. It's very little known, even among the Amarin staff, that this was their weekend getaway. Their real residence was a mansion in Tucson. About 3 years ago, it was listed, and we were able to find it and look at it. It's in the old Encano Park area of Tucson. It was listed for $3.2 million. So this was their country cottage, if you will. Here's Rose and her husband, William Shirley, out on the south porch, enjoying the afternoon sun. It was initially their practice to spend from Christmas until May in Arizona, and then they would go back east. The porch was falling away from the house, and about 5 years ago they had to reconstruct it. And today you can rent the Fulton residence for special occasions, and the south porch has been used for weddings and conferences and all manner of things. Color photography was just coming in, so here we get to see a color view of the house looking from the orchard. The orchard was listed as a line item in the budget for 2 years, but obviously they had other things in mind when they bought the property, so they let the orchard disappear. The building was built by Sunt Construction Company out of Tucson for $49,000. Today, with these 90-year-old buildings, $49,000 would barely cover the maintenance costs. In 1932, the Great Depression was still on, and some of the neighboring homesteaders were hardscrabble and willing to sell cheap, and Fulton had the money, so he bought an adjacent property, the Wynn Ranch, and here is the Wynn Ranch as it looked in about the 1940s. Today it looks even worse. It has stood empty for a long time. They got a new curator a while back that was taking an orientation tour of the property and went in there. In one room found about 800 pounds of Stone Age tools that had been collected by an archaeologist in West Texas. It took them 2 years to sort those out and catalog them. And today, if you know of a museum in West Texas that would like to have those, I'm sure they would like to get rid of them. My wife and I were privileged to go in there, and it is a creepy place today. It's full of spider webs and centipedes, and strange as it may seem, that in one corner, standing up against the wall, is an empty casket. Fulton went on to purchase the Westfall Ranch, the Corral Ranch, and finally the original Lloyd Adams Ranch. And today it brings it up to about 1,800 acres that composes the Amarin Foundation today. Time to meet the neighbors. And on the left here, that is Mr. Frank Owenby, owned the nearby C-Bar Ranch. Mr. Owenby and his brother Bill and sister Betty were in the quarter horse business. And there was something, I think, in the artist in Rose that was attracted to the conformation, the disposition, the color, the graceful movement of the quarter horse. So she hired Frank to set her up in the horse breeding business, giving the same attention to detail and quality that went into their house. Man standing next to Frank is Archie Durham. Archie was a teenage cowboy in New Mexico when his boss sent him to Arizona with a train car load of horses, and he never went back to New Mexico. He stayed here with Frank Owensby, and it wasn't just the horses that kept Archie there, but Archie was an amazing little guy. He went on to, just through hard work and perseverance, bought out Frank Owensby's operation. By the time he died, he had control of 26 sections of land in Cochise County and a quality quarter horse herd of his own. But here's the real reason Archie stayed. That's Betty Owensby. That's a cowboy sweetheart. They were married after a 6 weeks courtship. Their daughter went to school in Benson. And if you're going to be setting up a ranch operation, you're going to need ranch hands. Here's the first one they hired, Clarence LaPrada, also known as Curly LaPrada. I can't think of a better name for a Hollywood cowboy unless it's Rex Allen or Lash LaRue. But Curly was an all-around cowboy, and according to the 1940 census, he lived with Archie and Betty and was apparently related to them in some way. But here he is out on the south end of the ranch, and here he is out checking on the northern end of the ranch. You can find that spot today very simply by the rock formation. The rocks haven't changed much, but what really has changed is the vegetation. You go out there today and look, there is a lot more mesquite trees and a lot of less grass. Curly was an all-around hand. Fulton took him with him as a cook and a driver on some of his archaeological explorations. And if you're going to start a ranching operation, you not only need ranch hands, you need house hands. And here is the unidentified maid and butler. You're going to need a cook. The cook in this case was Lily Harrington. Lily was quite a gal. She spent her honeymoon on a cattle drive, went through 3 husbands, and worked for the Fulton family until she was 85 years old. If you ask Lily what was for supper, her standard reply was roadkill. It was always either chicken or steak and whatever vegetables were in season, but she would also probably tell you to get out of her kitchen, or she'd take that ladle to you. The magnificent old Vulcan stove behind her, I found in one of the stables. It was home to a family of rock squirrels, and I would love to see that restored today, but for safety and other reasons, the Amarin doesn't want to even touch that idea. Okay, if you're starting a ranch, you need to build some loading chutes, you need to build some corrals, you need to build stables. They built a 1/4-mile straightaway track, a 1/2-mile oval track. They built a horse hospital. They even had a concrete and steel slammer for the stallions when they got a little bit too frisky. They laid miles of fences and miles of pipeline, put in stock tanks. And all this is going on in the closing phases of World War II when you can't get building materials. You had to justify your need with the Department of Agriculture to buy lumber for an agricultural operation. Mr. Fulton's letter to the Department of Agriculture is still on file. He says in there that he needs the lumber to build corrals to keep the stallions separated from the milk cows. So I guess that made sense to the Department of Agriculture because he got the lumber. A few years back, one of the board members was upset over the condition of the starting gates at the racetrack. They're visible from the road as you go into the Amarin, and he wanted them tore down. I said, please don't do that. I'll rebuild them for you at my expense. So I did. And in clearing out the area and clearing away the mesquite that had grown up, I found the original loading chute here with the rusty lock still hanging on the gate. And beside it, in the ashes of a long dead campfire, lay the double F branding iron, which they have in the museum today. So after all that work is done in building the ranch, there's time to sit down and relax and swap stories. The foundation stallion for the Double F Ranch was Bombardier, a good World War II name. Second stallion she bought was Ben-Hur. Ben-Hur had a wire cut on his leg. He would never race again, but he produced some offspring with blazing speed. I looked at the American Quarter Horse Association website. You can find Ben-Hur's and Bombardier's pedigrees on there. They can tell you all about their offspring, but they couldn't tell me a thing about Rose Hayden. Rose sent Frank one time to Colorado with a check for $10,000 and instructions to buy some horses. He came home having spent the $10,000 with one horse. $10,000 is a pretty good price for a horse today. It was unheard of back then. But he bought Skipper's Prince, who turned out to be a champion of champions. As far as the money goes, the last year of her horse operation, Rose spent $67,000 on just her hobby. So again, if you're taking notes, whether you're rich or poor, it's nice to have $67,000 for your hobbies. Here is evidence of an active breeding program. We have colts and pregnant mares. Frank Owensby had a real knack for knowing just what combination of genes would produce a winning horse. That was his skill and his fame. And if a colt didn't turn out the way Frank expected, the standard answer was, well, Bombardier got out again. Here we have Rose visiting the maternity ward. Note Rose is wearing a dress here. They had a maternity hospital on the ranch. It's still there today, although it's starting to decay. And they had a vet on call, Doc Sanders. Doc was a delightful old guy. He made it out to the ranch when he was in his 90s. I got to talk to him. He had some wonderful stories to tell, one of which was about Skipper's Prince, the horse that he bought for $10,000. Skipper got his hoof hung in a gate chain and tore the sheath off. So they had to call Doc to the ranch to put Skipper down. And today, if you know where to look on the ranch, you will find probably the only equestrian graveyard in southern Arizona. Skipper's Prince has his own tombstone, as does Ben-Hur and Texas Tom and some of her other stallions. Doc also told of the time Frank Owensby called him up and says, Doc, you got to come to the ranch. Mrs. Fulton is on her way out here from back east, and we got a horse show coming up, and all the horses are sick. So Doc came out and looked, and they had the finest accommodations. They had fly-controlled stalls. They had air-conditioned stalls. They had on-demand water. They had elevated feeding troughs. And Doc said, well, Frank, here's your problem. He says, you need to feed these horses at ground level where they can eat and chew like nature intended them to. And Frank said, Doc, if Mrs. Fulton caught me feeding her horses off the ground, she wouldn't fire me, she would kill me. After Curly LaPrada left, Rose advertised for a horse trainer in one of the trade journals. And the man who answered the call was John Hoyt from California. He was a fatherless school dropout. According to the story, he got in an argument with his school teacher and told her that he could make more money at the horse track in one weekend than she could in a month of teaching. And she said, well, why don't you do that? So he did. He became known as the man who could make ordinary horses do extraordinary things. No matter whether it was bulldogging, racing, roping, cutting, whatever, Johnny Hoyt was your man to train the horses. So they really were an unbeatable team. Frank Owensby was a certified quarter horse judge, president of the Arizona Quarter Horse Association, Johnny Hoyt was president of the American Horseman Association and held every record there was for training championship horses. And here's Johnny with one of his horses that he has trained. Stories of Johnny are also legend. It's told that there was a horse event, a horse show in Tucson one weekend that got rained out. After the rain went away, everybody was standing around looking at this sea of mud that was the arena and saying, well, it's over, we might as well go home. When the gate swung open and in galloped Johnny Hoyt. He yanked up the reins, the horse locked its legs and skidded halfway across the arena. And everybody said, did you see that? We got to try that. So the next hour, everybody had a muddy good time sliding their horses across the arena. There's also the story of a young girl Johnny was teaching how to ride, and she proudly showed him her new spurs one day, the new clip-on spurs, and Johnny looked at it, snapped the tine off, handed it back to her, said, now, honey, get yourself some real spurs. If you didn't want the unvarnished truth, don't ask Johnny Hoyt, because that's what you were going to get. It was rare that Rose went to a horse event and didn't win a trophy of some kind. She originally started out with race horses, and that's why they had the racetrack at the FF Ranch. And by the way, I was able to locate that. It's overgrown with mesquites today, but I found some old aerial photographs where you could just barely trace the outline of it today. After that, she, for some reason, got out of the racing business and just went into horse shows. And she had, but when she was in the racing business, she had special parking privileges at the Sonoyta racetrack where she could pull her car right up to the fence and not have to get out of her car to see the events. In the last year of her life, she was awarded the Finley Trophy as a special trophy, as kind of a lifetime achievement award. It was also, not knowing it was the last year of her life, she bought a lifetime membership in the American Quarter Horse Association. Here's Mr. Fulton on a horse, and the trainer, Frank Owensby. Notice the body language, if you will. Frank is obviously totally at ease around horses. Here he is leaning against one, and to me anyway, Fulton looks like he's kind of uptight there. He's not really used to being around horses. But the love of horses did go through one branch of the family. Daughter Liz loved horses, and here we have granddaughter Sherry with her colt, Tonto. And that branch of the family is still in the quarter horse business today. And there is daughter Liz. Liz, like her mother, went to private schools. And after her senior year, she took a month off and took a tour of Europe, came home to the ranch and married Kenny Gunter, who was a $40 a month cowboy working for Lloyd Adams. He was 5 years younger than Liz and had an 8th grade education, which must have just thrilled Daddy to death. But he did what all millionaire daddies do. He bought them their own ranch, which today Willie Adams takes care of. Back in the 30s and 40s, the Tucson Rodeo was a big deal. The whole town got involved, and everybody wore Western clothes, including Fulton's daughter-in-law, Betty, on the left, and some of her friends. And notice their dress. At that time, it was kind of socially unacceptable for women to wear pants, but it was okay during Western Week. And that was the icebreaker that ultimately led to the exception of women wearing pants. And I think we got, what, one or two with shirts on there, and the rest are in pants. But as always, the Fultons dressed for dinner. And this is Western Music Night at the FF Ranch. We've brought in a band from Tucson. And there's Rose and William. He's got his black suit and tie on. With the ranch having a staff of 6 families to keep it going, 6 families drawing water at there, produces a drop in the aquifer. Eventually you're going to run short of water, so we had to develop some new water sources, and here was the accepted way of water witching or dowsing, looking for a new aquifer. Meanwhile, you have to dig the existing wells deeper, and that's become a tremendous problem in that area today. They pump so much water out of the earth that it's cracking. If you go east from Dragoon to Cochise, you'll come across a sign by the side of the road warning that the road can crack open at any time, and there are some large fissures in that area. When you came to the FF Ranch as a guest, and Fultons were constantly entertaining out-of-town guests, you were treated to the Dude Ranch experience, and so here we see Frank Owensby out with some ladies on a ride on the ranch. Not only the adults, but here's little guest Belly Tucker with his first set of cowboy clothes and probably his first horse ride. And it was Rose's practice at Christmas. Every cowboy got a new hat. Meanwhile, the work must go on in training horses. And here we see a group of horses being trained for standing at halter, which means posing for the judge. The judge stands at 4 different places around the horse, gets 4 different views of them, and the horse has to be able to show his best side each time. But you don't need training for the horses. Come feed time, they know the sound of the truck, and there's the FF Ranch truck out throwing out feed for some of the horses. And in the evening, it was time to bring the cows in. They kept cows for one good reason, and that is a horse and a cowboy's job is chasing cows. You got to learn to bulldog them and rope them, and so they kept a small herd there. And also, they would bring them in because evening time, the entertainment was always roping. That was one of the big perks of being a cowboy on the Double F Ranch, was you get all the roping practice you ever wanted. And after roping time, it was happy hour time. This little watercolor was left in Rose's guest book. I can't think of the man's name now. Clayton Lockett who had a Indian art gallery in Tucson for years and years. He was also a charter member of the Tucson Corral of Westerners, and he was a picker for Mr. Fulton's. Many of the articles in his collection were there thanks to Clayton finding them. If you go out there today and look at those magnificent old church doors that are at the entrance to the museum and the life-size crucifix in the hallway, those were found in Mexico by Clayton Lockett. So if you go to the Amarin today and ask about the FF Ranch, you might get some blank stares and be told that this is the Amarin Foundation campus. And that's because Mr. Fulton left an endowment of $10 million to perpetuate his hobby of collecting Indian artifacts. When Rose died in 1966, there was no endowment for the FF Ranch. So it is slowly fading into history today, and I want to thank you for letting me share this and keep it alive tonight. So with that, I'll be glad to take any questions or comments you might have. None? Yes, sir. One reason he bought that is when they stayed at the Triangle T, he found that there were Indian ruins in the area. I've been in places on that ranch where you can't walk without crunching pottery underfoot. Right in where the parking lot is today was an Indian village. Where the picnic grounds are, you can find bedrock mortars for grinding corn that are still there. And actually, they went so far as to find a Clovis point, which is probably 10,000 years old on the ranch there. So yes, he was fully aware of the archaeological potential of that. And he did dig up a village there. Mr. Fulton early on was a director of the Museum of the American Indian. He worked hand in glove with George Gustav Hay. That collection of Hay's became the foundation for the Smithsonian Museum of the American Indian. And when he was on the board of directors, he and George Hay would swap things back and forth. And if you look at some of those quality artifacts in the museum collection, you will find they're cataloged under both Smithsonian and Amarin catalog numbers. He insisted on quality. He would not buy things that were made for the tourist market. It had to be made and used by an Indian. Today, that is changing drastically. Every time I go out there, there's a new exhibit, and it's all stuff that is made for the tourist trade. That it? Okay, thank you very much.